I'm here to talk about a vision of inclusivity and performance and how it interacts with the art sector. What I'm really interested in is how musical subcultures like punk and hip hop are intrinsically disability movements. So I'm going to be putting that case forward and outlining visions for how we can embed accessibility and how we make spaces welcoming for the most amount of people and how we can sort of embed that intrinsically into our work and the work of arts organisations, and a little bit of a vision of my design of an accessible performance space. So, I am Rowan James. I'm a poet, I'm a theatre maker, and I'm into accessible tech enthusiast. I'm going to start off by proving that I am a poet. I'm not going to do a theatre show, but I am going to prove I am a poet, and I'm going to do a poem called Labels. I'm going to puncture from that some of my talk with a couple of poems where I feel that I can make the point better in poems than I can in talk, which is most of my life. So this is called Labels, and it goes like this. Disabled, unstable, labels hanging from my navel, with a locket round my neck, with a list of what I can't do and a short of one of what I'm able. A gesture and a smile doing the job of a Babel. Because is it a bread roll with a hole in, or is it actually a bagel? Is it a wooden platform on stilts, or is it actually a table? And if one of those legs was brick and it was propped up with books, would it still fall under the same label? Hollow out the holy saucepan, it's actually a colander, because every utensil has to have a label. Whether it's a serving spoon or actually a ladle. Hollow out the man whose life is lived, trying to strain his pasta, surrounded by colanders, looking for a sieve. Thank you. So, my mission statement is, my vision for this talk is to outline how a robust understanding of disability can help to create spaces that welcome the most amount of people. I want to create versatile performance spaces accessible to everyone. I want to work to demystify disability through addressing language and discrimination. I want to make everywhere more accessible. So little disclosure, I have very minor brain damage, and so I guess you could describe me as having an invisible disability, although if it wasn't actually invisible, it wouldn't be a problem. So it's kind of, but so even I find that it's quite hard for me to sometimes access arts because of subconscious bias to not being easily placed. Like, I sound drunk or learning disabled, to cut a long story short. And so I find that I often, when accessing arts, find it hard. Like, a story of this would be at a 20th anniversary of a venue in Bristol recently, I was doing a talk about disability inclusion. I had a wristband and I practically got assaulted just trying to walk back into the place where I'd done a talk, because she just didn't think that I was meant to be there. Even when I showed her my wristband, she still followed me in. So these are the sort of things that I want to look a little bit how we can make disability more in our conscious and how we think about disability. So I'm going to define terms. So there's traditionally two ways to think about disability. There's hundreds of different models, but the main ones are the medical model and the social model. The social model has become a really big thing recently, and people's understanding of this idea that being disabled is actually about your environment, and that it's not the person. So it's taken the onus of the medical model looks at what's the problem with the individual, and the social model looks at what the problem with society is, the blocks, the barriers. And that can be put into two categories. Of a nice way to sort of think about it is stairs, as in people staring at you, and stairs, as in things you can't get up. So, yeah. I am a real fan of looking at disability from the eyes of an emerging model, which is a cultural model of disability. This is because the cultural model of disability allows for both a medical issues to be part of your identity and the discrimination and the barriers that you face to be included as part of your identity. But what I think is more powerful is that recognising as the culture and the cultural uniqueness of what being disabled means. It's inbuilt in my identity, and when I am with other people who identify in that way, I feel that I can talk in ways that I can't, and that's, for me, what defines it as a culture. I've been... Can you move to the culture one? So, you probably know who this is. This is Ian Jury. But I've been thinking about this for a long time, about how early sort of punk culture and hip-hop culture are both intrinsically related to disability. Can I read the quotes, Liz? So this is from a white paper that I found that's called Punk Rock and Disability, Cripping Subculture. And in this, David Church says, disability has been one of the most foundational, yet one of the least explored representational tropes of the punk milieu. And so what I take this to mean is, like, John Lydon had epilepsy, Ian Jury obviously had polio, but actually punk was about being unique, and it's desirable to be individual. And actually a lot of people, in the same way as hip-hop came out of people in poor urban environments in America wanting to make music and not affording violin lessons, and so making music out of what they had with turntables, I feel that punk came out of people's barriers to mainstream music, mainstream performance. I have a lot of friends that were part of the sort of traveller after post-punk movement that is sort of accredited with the sort of first Immersion sort of circus shows and punk circus shows. And a lot of those people, the reason they got into doing that was because they didn't know how to fill in an arts council. And it was easier to do it on this DIY movement. So I would argue that punk comes out of disability movement. And in the same way as, if we can go to the next, this is from a talk, a white paper called When I Move, You Move. And this is exerting, it looks at Ludacris's music video, When I Move, You Move, that has lots of disability imagery within it. But Rebecca A. Adelman argues in this paper that disability and hip-hop disability activism is intrinsically related to hip-hop through the idea of not living up to expectation of the white middle-class male body, and the movement comes out of a objection to this. It's also said in this paper, which I particularly like, that in hip-hop, it's the only area of music, area of performance where having a speech impediment is a desired attribute for uniqueness. So if you look at someone like KRS-One, like he's gravelly and he makes his larynx sound more gravelly, and that's part of his sound. Lots of, I mean, without naming everyone, if you listen to lots of hip hop, you often find there's people have a slight lisp, and that's what they get their style from. That's how they make the rhymes work, because it adds a little bit of delay and style, and they can punctuate what they're saying. And I find that too. So, which is nice, I'm going to read a poem now called iPad is Disabled, and I think it's a nice illustration of my understanding of the models of disability. Has anyone ever put in the wrong key code into their iPad 3 times? This one's for you. Operational message. iPad is disabled. iPad has a medical disability. Your iPad is impaired. There is something wrong with your iPad. Please take to the nearest Apple store. We'll be able to restore your iPad to normal capabilities by mending or replacing affected areas. Your iPad will run at nearly normal capacity. In extreme cases, iPad may be quarantined for its own safety and the safety of other devices. iPad is charitably disabled. Your iPad is impaired. Even simple tasks overload its poor little operating system. Your iPad needs understanding and sympathy. Your warranty does not cover such action. However, there are Apple-affiliated volunteer groups that can provide a safe space for your iPad to feel valued and complete tasks in line with its potential. iPad is inspirationally disabled. Your iPad is great. Despite some operational difficulties, these should be celebrated and recognised as the key features that makes it unique. It can be seen as an inspiration to all tablet devices. iPad is disabled by society. Your iPad, although working outside normal operational standards, is capable of most tasks. However, the network is not compatible with your device. It will not allow you to access certain prohibited areas. If the network settings can be changed, your iPad will work as desired. iPad experiences disability. Your iPad has a small operational glitch. Your iPad is now classed as having a disability. The network will disable your iPad frequently due to company policy, existing structures and procedures. Please isolate your iPad as soon as possible by phoning our helpline. Our engineers may see past the glitch depending on their understanding. In most cases, your iPad will be red taped and recorded as disabled in our system. In extreme cases, your iPad will be ignored and left to die. iPad is culturally disabled. You've just typed the password incorrectly 3 times. Wait 30 seconds and try again. Okay, thank you. So, I think I'd like to just pick that apart a little bit. This is a personal note on what I see my frustrations with how disability is still represented in our organisations. And to put this down to a really simple, what my objection is after the Paralympic Games, a lot of arts organisations adopted a very celebratory idea of disability. That's celebrating uniqueness and celebrating people's talent. Now, I sound like a real Grinch when I'm like, I don't like that. But there is 4 out reasons. And in my opinion, it comes down to the fact that you shouldn't have to be an international artist or an international sportsman to have the respect that we're given as human beings and the rights that we're given as human beings. And that's a right not to be made fun of, a right to be celebrated as an individual, and to have to earn that right through proving to society that actually you have these hidden talents, to me seems perverse. And is actually at odds and at loggerheads, forgive the pun, to the idea of the social model, which these same art organisations now champion as like a, you know, as intrinsically part of their organisation and the words they use. But I do think that this sort of celebratory idea is at conflict to that. And the reason that I get angry and the reason that I care is I think at the moment it's still, disability discrimination is a massively underrepresented and talked about area of life. And without going too dark into it, like I tried to keep up with the figures, but the new figures have come out that it's gone up another 45%. Hate crime against disabled people has gone up another 45% in the last 12 months. That's following like a 400% increase since 2010. And I would argue that that relationship between a negative government policy that excludes disabled people from being able to be included, for want of a better word, and then a negative representation has accumulated an increase in apathy towards disabled people's rights. And sometimes as a disabled person, I almost feel like I'm told to accept it because of course you're disabled, of course you're going to be seen like that because you identify as disabled, or it's almost like these things. Yeah, I feel, and this is talking on a personal note, it's not necessarily the only opinion, but it makes me feel often like the blame is put on me for being disabled when I am often the victim and being discriminated against. So, could we play the Stella clip? I'm going to play you, this is Stella Young, who did a very famous TED talk about inspiration porn. Inspiration porn being the term that she's coined to describe this mode in society given to disabled people to inspire others and to tell them, oh, your life's not so bad. Imagine doing that with no legs or something, which is not very helpful to having a positive self-identity as a disabled person.
We're not real people. We are there to inspire. And in fact, you know, I'm sitting on this stage looking like I do in this wheelchair, and you are probably kind of expecting me to inspire you, right? Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you dramatically. I'm not here to inspire you. I'm here to tell you that we have been lied to about disability. Yeah, we've been sold the lie that disability is a bad thing. Capital B, capital T. It's a bad thing. And to live with disability makes you exceptional. It's not a bad thing. And it doesn't make you exceptional.
So now I'm going to shift to talk about performance spaces and technology. I believe technology is an extremely powerful tool in providing spaces for disabled people and everybody to interact. I think it's comes down to social infrastructure. So my thinking is if you can make it easier for people to be included into these spaces, this makes us or disabled people more visible, and that is the way to combat intolerance, is when people learn, things become less scary. And this has been proven time and time again when different groups made, it sounds a bit violent, but made to mix, then they generally get on. And I think that is where I'd really like to see, this, especially in the art scene, more radical performance spaces, but underpinned by really well-trained staff, people that have been taught about invisible disabilities, and these things that really embed. And I'm going to suggest some very simple things that organisations and venues can do to underpin or support the introduction of tech. So one of the things that I think, I saw a Facebook post, and it was a person asking about any small venues, what very cheap and low-cost things, exchanges they made to their venue to make it more accessible. And immediately this was like pounced on by people representing big event or representing smaller venues, sort of saying, well, actually, we can't afford it. It's for, you know, the bigger venues don't do it, so why should we? Which is a bit sickening as a person, because what we're talking about, a lot of it, is very clearly state. I think often venues get embarrassed about being not accessible, but sometimes that is more negative than actually just owning your inaccessibility and saying, we're not accessible, we can't provide for these things. What's really frustrating for disabled people is having to ring up venues that don't clearly state it just to find out that it's inaccessible, because it's almost like an embarrassment not to be inaccessible, which makes you more inaccessible. So I've told you about the 20th anniversary of a radical anti-discrimination process, and I got discriminated against by the staff. Another thing, like, I find that often venues really do want to do better and want to do it, but sometimes sensationalist strategies that they implement that haven't really been thought through. For example, I heard the head of a Bristol venue talking about training the staff in sign language to be able to tell a deaf person, but only in phrases to say to a deaf person, like, you're not drunk. And I made the point that, you know, deaf people are traditionally often get told that they're not welcome in these spaces, and actually a one-way conversation to say, what if the deaf person didn't feel that he was drunk and felt that he was being discriminated against? How would he be then to put that point? And what I would say is more important than training your bouncers in a few phrases to tell deaf people that they can't come in and that they're too drunk would be to have really good training for your bouncers about deaf culture and deaf people. And so that's, for me, is just a almost like a machine gun solution, when actually much simpler, softer solutions, I would say, are much better. So I think I'm going to start coming to this bit. So could we have, actually no, go back. So I was part of a, thank you, Liz. I was part of a fellowship that was around immersive technology. And this is kind of my research questions that I was exploring. So I was exploring the way, the relationship between creative tech, art, immersion, accessibility, inequality, and that's and equality, not inequality. And I hypothesise that if you get all these right, in the middle you will have immersion and inclusivity. That isn't an exact science, but I think these things give the potential for providing really immersive and inclusive spaces. So I'd like to finish my talk by showing you a VR design of an accessible auditorium that I've designed, but it looks not great on that picture. Honestly, it looks better than that in real life. Can you just spin the laptop round?
Yeah, if you want a closer look, I can show you at the end in a bit more detail.
Is it? Could you just like hold it up and I show it? 'Cause yeah, I am going to just have to try and talk you through it.
I'm afraid I'm not able to.
Can you?
Okay, got you.
Okay. So the crux of the matter is that what I would like to do is these things in the middle that's a podium. I envisage these being vibrating audience platforms that part of my exploration has been to prototype tiles that split up the frequencies, because what I'd really like to do is create vibrational platforms that better represent nuances in music through vibrations. And my idea is to have the audience put in the middle, which is nice. It's both figuratively and metaphorically putting the audience literally at the centre of the performance. And on the outside, I would like to have screens with and using other people's existing work, using sensors to represent dancers on stage in colour in the screens behind. So it's an enclosed sensory auditorium experience, and I would like it to be used for versatile music performances, ballet, plays, and inviting companies and different different performance genres to reinvent their work in this accessible space. Any questions? Yeah.
Why do you put the audience in the middle?
Very good question. I think like something that I want to experiment, because I feel that even with like interpreters or like when you have accessible spaces, it's very hard not to have to then be very prescriptive in the deaf people will sit here so that they can see the interpreter. So I'm looking at ways to combat that by having a place where everyone would be, so you can almost see everything, but then the differentiation of like communication methods, ways where it could be seen from all different angles. One of the ways that I would like to do that is to make the interpreter more part of a show, and instead of having like a fixed spot, to have them on like a roving camera, so where at every angle there would be a projection, say up on the screens, of the communication all the way round, so that you didn't have this, you can only see it if you can only feel it if like you're directly, but then you can't see the dancers behind you. Or if you're looking at the interpreter in the bottom hand corner, it's really hard to then also be looking at the physical theatre or the dance on stage that's intrinsic to the performance. So that's, for many reasons, it's also about then creating a colour for people with visual impairments and how that can work at the same time. With a lot of these things, it's hard to do everything together and then, from a theatre maker's perspective, and devise a meaningful show within that. It can sometimes, or having a show and then trying to put these things in afterwards, and it's the structure to have it embedded into the devising at the beginning and devised in this way. So, and I am at the moment making a theatre show called Room for the Elephant. I'm experimenting with this, some of these ideas of how I might work in this kind of reverse route.
So you can come back to us at the end of December with the experts,
Is there a limit on the size of the audience? Because if you've got more than 5 people, then as soon as something's happening behind you, then half the people won't be able to see it.
I think it will come down to how you interact with the use of the screens to be able, and the other sensory things going on. So it might not all be visual anyway. I don't know is the answer to the question. I mean, there are obviously problems with having people on one level. So, and how my original design, the audience podium was tiered with ramps like a helter-skelter around a wedding cake, like on platforms. So you've got the different platforms. But I think maybe 2 tiers would work quite well to give a little bit of levels. I envisage that there is no, that will be really interesting in the creative process when you're actually plotting a show and how you justify the different, like, where people are. It might be that you actually have 2 characters talking across the stage, so they're actually talking over the audience. So you're able to choose. Obviously, then there's mobile issues, but hopefully that will be combated with using the screens as well to maybe double up. I don't know, but I have ideas. Any other questions? Anything else you think I might be able to, you'd like to discuss or me to go into more detail? Fine. Thank you so much for coming.